these just epic heli shots, and these guys in, spandex and what looked like cross country skis in their back, just ripping up and down along these ridges in Europe. And I was just like, it just all of a sudden I was like, what is this? I've never heard of it. Like, it seems so silly, but also so cool. And so kind of like again in that coming back from that back injury, I kind of went all in. I was like, I haven't even done this sport, but this is gonna be my thing. And Skimo it's the sport, it's the racing bastard stepchild of backcountry ski touring. Leadville is, at the end of the day, who can hold sort of like tempo sweet spot forever at super high altitudes. I mean, I live at 8,000 feet, and Leadville to me still feels like breathing through a straw.
Aspen ski legend John Gaston is my guest today on the CoachCast. John is arguably the country's best ski mountaineering or Skimo racer and competes on the world stage in the winter. He is the current U.S. National Ski Mountaineering Champion and has won the most prestigious U.S. events multiple times, including having won the Power of Four 10 times. In the summers, he rips up the trails near his home in Aspen, where he placed second in the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, ahead of many of the world's top professional cyclists. I hope you enjoy our conversation, where John reveals his training philosophy surrounding being world-class in two different sports. John Gaston, thanks so much for joining me. You're up there in beautiful Aspen, Colorado. Thank you so much. Usually I see you from behind, and on the start line, you're a few rows ahead of me. And by the finish line, you're a few hours ahead of me, especially in like a race like the Power of Four. So this is the most I'm going to be able to interact with you ever. So this is like really exciting for me. I got all kinds of questions. We're going to dig into a lot of the meat of your training. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, well, like I said, thank you for having me. Been a big fan of TrainingPeaks for a long time, and definitely seen you at the races for quite some years. So thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, well, I wish I started racing. First question, what are we going to call the sport? The sport of ski mountaineering, randonnée, ski touring, skimo. What what are we going to default to here?
My personal favorite is the like Italian version of ski alp, which is just sounds a little bit cooler than skimo. But no, I mean, that sport gets it's easy to knock on it because yeah, it's true that the vast majority of races have few to no mountaineering elements in it. But I think more. I mean, the races in Europe definitely have some of that, and some of them can be quite intense. But certainly in the U.S., a lot of them kind of get knocked down for that nomenclature. But I think I like the most appropriate like name would actually just be like ski touring racing, but that just
Yeah.
doesn't really roll off the tongue too well. So I think we gotta stick
Well,
with Skimo for now.
for listeners that are maybe hearing about you for the first time, a lot of folks maybe have seen your name for the first time via, getting second in Leadville 100 mountain bike race recently. So big congrats on that. We'll get into all that, but tell us more about, okay, what is ski touring, ski racing, just the fundamentals of it, and how long have you been racing it?
Yeah, Skimo is it's the sport, it's the racing bastard stepchild of backcountry ski touring. So it's we skin or hike up mountains depending on the section of the course. And then we rip skins and ski back down as fast as we can, and we do it a whole bunch of times. And some of the races start and end at the same place. Some of them are point to point. There's a few different types, ranging from very short sprint efforts of about 3 to 4 minutes up to the vertical race, which is about a half an hour full gas uphill only, more of like a fitness test. And then kind of the crown jewel would be the individual race, similar to like an XCO mountain bike race, sort of that hour and a half type World Cup Olympic standard. And then teams races, which are generally longer. Sometimes they're stage races, and they're usually always with a partner, usually two, sometimes three if they're on glaciated terrain over in Europe. And it's a really fun sport. I got into it pretty late in life. I grew up alpine skiing primarily, and I was a very active kid, but I was not into endurance sports per se. I was definitely um, loath to climb up hills and took a chairlift whenever possible, whether on a bike or skis. But then during college, my brother and I started just climbing Highlands Bowl out here in Highlands, Aspen Highlands, a lot more, and slowly but surely, just doing laps after lap of Highlands Bowl on the big freeride gear. Sort of started to scratch that itch a little bit, and I realized I was pretty good at going uphill as well. And then it kind of all came to a head the winter after I graduated school. I broke my back, and coming off of that, I kind of had to be a bit cautious that first year about like just hucking off every cliff in sight um, or whatnot.
Yeah.
And I started skinning a bit, just like on the resort, just because I was sort of limited to like an hour a day of activity and very mellow, non-impact stuff. And um, it sort of snowballed. It was kind of a combination of a few things like that was sort of the start of it. I was on some big heavy gear, but then that same winter, my brother started ski racing with Max Tom, who you know quite well from some races. And at the time, I remember making so much fun of them when they first told me about this new sport they were trying out. I think their first race was Irwin Lodge, or at least my brother's. It's probably Max's like 50th. But he came back with, I think it was a pair of Dynafit TLT5 boots. I think I called them like Elf Mountain fruit boots. I mean, I just had no idea what they were. I thought they were so silly looking. But then, again, on the couch all winter, busted back, like metal brace. I started kind of looking into this sport a bit more, and it just so happened that was the first year that Solomon released Killian's Quest. I don't know if you remember that
Oh yeah,
webisode series.
yeah,
And the very first episode of that started off with shots of him racing Pyramenta with these just epic heli shots, and these guys in spandex and what looked like cross country skis in their back, just ripping up and down along these ridges in Europe. And I was just like, it just all of a sudden I was like, what is this? I've never heard of it. Like, seems so silly, but also so cool. And so kind of like again in that coming back from that back injury, I kind of went all in. I was like, I haven't even done this sport, but this is gonna be my thing. And and the following winter, I think I asked for like, I think you couldn't even get the gear in the States really back then. And so I asked for like for my grandparents actually like some package deal from Telemark Pyrenees. You get like boots, bindings,
wow,
skis type thing for,
yeah,
uh, and I just went off the deep end. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I had very few technical skills. I could ski on hill really fast, but as you know, like when you're in rando gear, um, that margin for error is much smaller than it is on like a 1/1000 foot,
yeah.
190 freeride ski, and I would just crash my way down the mountain, just taking so much risk, being such an idiot. But it took me quite a few years, frankly, to figure it out and to kind of really turn into an endurance athlete first, and not a free ride athlete pretending to dabble in endurance sports. And then another like 5 years to honestly start to believe in myself to the level of like investing in the training. Frankly, I mean, it's one of those things like growing up and you see something like the Tour de France or World Cup or World Champ level, anything, frankly, and sort of like outside looking in, it's like, oh, that's cool. That's not for me. That's never going to be me. I wasn't born like that. So, um, you know, I can only do so much. But then at the end of the day, like you start chipping away at it, and it took me a while to realize, well, maybe I could actually get somewhere if I do start ramping up and putting in the time and effort that everyone else, at that level has, and taking off 1,000 hours a year and just give it a go. And that's why I did these sports at a somewhat what I say like recreationally fast level for quite some time, but it wasn't until I was quite old, basically till I turned 30 almost, or 29 and a half, that I finally first had what I would call like my first big breakout season from like a truly, like for lack of a better word, elite level competition standpoint. And so, yeah, I'm an old guy, but I came to the game late and still getting faster, so it's all fun.
Well, you've had an amazing 2022. What I believe you won U.S. Ski Mountaineering Association Nationals in Vail. You won Power of Four as usual. How many times you won Power of Four in Aspen?
10.
10 times. Grand Traverse, did you win that this year?
Won that with Cam. Yep.
Yep. And then
Um,
second in Leadville 100 mountain bikers. So, how do you go from top ski mountaineering athlete to literally beating guys that are making very good salaries, mountain bike racing, gravel racing? You're second to Keegan Swenson, who's won everything this year. And, to podium at Leadville is a major podium, worldwide. So how do we reconcile that? Did you just flip one day and say, I want to target Leadville, or, how did this come about?
uh, yeah, I wouldn't say it's not as simple as flipping the switch one day to the next, but I've always done a lot of my winter training on the bike. So I
So
spend
in the summer leading up to the winter.
yeah, I spend. I mean, I do absolutely zero training on the bike during the 6 months of the winter season, other than maybe the occasional spin here or there on the trainer. But I've always done a fair bit of cycling in general in the summer, and I used to race mountain bikes back in the day in my amateur days. Sort of again like recreationally fast. Never. I mean, I did the town series races here and some local races in Colorado, and would just get my teeth kicked in at the bigger events against fast guys. And I kind of stepped back from that. Yeah, in 2015, and then it wasn't until like 2017 I started focusing on Skimo, like getting better results internationally, um, and then after that I started throwing a little bit more racing in the summer just as sort of short term motivation. Like I was never, so Skimo is kind of split. So I sort of say half the guys come from a running background, half of them come from a cycling background, and that's not it's oversimplification for sure, but I definitely come from the cycling side of that equation, and so my training is taken much more heavily uh, from kind of a cycling bias than from a running bias, from in terms of volume, periodization, and polarization stuff, and I do a fair bit of running and hiking for Skimo, especially in the fall, but I've learned to do as little as necessary during the summer, frankly, because I'd rather be out ripping trails on my bike. And so, I've always, the last few years in particular, as I've been doing these very large annual volumes, anyways, like I've always been quite fit in the summer, but sort of purposely not race fits because, it burns a lot of matches to stay in Skimo shape at that top level all winter long, especially those harder, shorter races. And I tried not to overcook myself in the summer. And so even this summer, I only did, two races. I didn't do a whole calendar like the other guys. But anyways, back to the Leadville thing, I signed on with the Feed High Performance team as just a supplementary sponsor to Strafe back in the fall. And talking to Brandon, who runs that team, I knew that like a lot of their athletes are on the Leadville or the Grand Prix like Lifetime Series, and Leadville in particular was kind of like their biggest race for the whole team. Like they were really psyched on that race and really wanted me to do it. And I can always be convinced pretty easily. It's right over the pass from Aspen, and it sort of always fits in pretty well with just logging big hours in the summer, anyways. And so, starting last fall, I definitely put it in the back of my head as like something to look towards once the season was over. I didn't. That is to say, I mean, I didn't focus on it 1 second until May. I did a full winter calendar, which came with its own challenges health wise this year, and then I took April basically off. I took 2 weeks totally off because I was so fried after the Grand Traverse, and then got a week of training in and promptly got COVID. So I was starting, man, like mid May.
Timing.
I was way on the back foot and pretty stressed about that, but I tried not to stress it too much. And yeah, I just started building back up. And Leadville, like as hard and epic of a race as it is, and in some ways, it's not the most. Um, it doesn't require all that much specificity from a fitness point of view. I mean, I don't get nearly as fancy with my, my intervals or my polarization and stuff as I will like this fall, for example, leading into the winter. we're gonna have to be just sharper and faster at these really high intensity efforts. I mean, Leadville is at the end of the day, who can hold sort of like tempo sweet spot forever at super high altitudes. I mean, I live at 8,000 feet, and Leadville to me still feels like breathing through a straw. and
Right.
uh, and so my mentality was a little bit different. I didn't focus so much on yeah, getting like just super sharp, and just I spent basically that last half of May and all of June just building as big an engine as possible. And then I took a week off over 4th of July, went back east with the family, and then I came back out here and had 5 weeks to just like buckle down and kind of. That was when I sort of dropped for that 5 weeks. I did sort of drop a lot of the Skimo specific like running and strength stuff to focus sort of one full block just on Leadville. Um, but it wasn't that stressful. I mean, I uh, I kind of like the way my training goes anyways. I do tend to save a lot of like I was saying, like the VO2 max efforts for like the fall and the winter anyways. And so my training was quite sort of meat and potatoes, like sweet spot and threshold work, and a lot of volume. And it didn't almost even matter for me like how specific it was past that. I just had kind of some targets in my head, sort of like hours a week I wanted to hit. And I mean, I don't even have. I'm not one of those guys that ride by miles, because yeah, living out here and with Skimo, like I'm very much just a time focused sort of, whether it's an interval or a ride. I don't even have distance, I don't think, on my bike computer now that I say that. I did turn on distance for Leadville though, because I I didn't know needed to know where all the feed zones were. And ironically, even though I live over the pass, I did not check out 1 foot of that course, which was
Wow.
maybe not brilliant. But I just sort of I don't know. I got into a good groove over here and was just knocking out big weeks and feeling good, and didn't really want to disrupt that too much. And I do think I almost overcooked it a little bit. And in hindsight, saving grace was I ended up jumping into the Snowmass 50-mile race the weekend before, which was not on the plan at all. And I was not planning on doing that, but the Monday before that race, so we're talking 2 weeks before Leadville, I was supposed to do another, like, my last big week. But a friend of mine texted me that like, hey, are you doing this race on Saturday? And it wasn't even I totally wasn't even on my radar. Which is pretty bad that because I live here. It should have been. But it was a good excuse. I was like, you know what, I'm feeling pretty tired. Maybe this is a good excuse to rest up for 4 days in the name of racing. And at the time, it didn't feel great, but I think in hindsight, it was probably the right call, because I may have, if I had done that one extra 25 or 30 hour week, I probably would have been a little too cooked going into
Yeah.
Leadville. And as a result, this tune-up race it's polar opposite of Leadville. It was basically just me and Simi Hamilton just destroying each other on I think it's 95% single track, um, and just so the exact opposite, just super punchy, up down, on off all day, and very technical. But at the same time, I think that was pretty beneficial, just to sort of like sharpen the mental skills for racing at speed at Leadville. I mean, Leadville is not a technical race by any stretch of the imagination, but it's technically challenging in that you are navigating these like dirt roads at super high speeds in a pack. And everyone, especially that first sort of hour and a half till you get to pipeline, everyone is so hyped up and excited and thinks they have a shot at winning, and probably took like 6 caffeine gels that morning, and people are taking some crazy risks. And it was a little nerve wracking for sure, but I think having tried to follow Simi downhill for 4.5 hours the previous weekend, I made me feel a lot more comfortable um, when it came down to Leadville for sure.
You mentioned 25 to 30 hour weeks. Is that your typical, like when we think about periodization, I assume you're prioritizing the skiing over the mountain biking in terms of like your absolute peak for the year. When does that come? How do you manage? I mean, you effectively peaked for Leadville, but maybe not to the ultimate peak that you could have been. And when is your like ski peak kind of time frame?
I don't. Uh, I should probably start by saying my training could certainly be more periodized. Like it's not to the level of, say, U.S. like cross country skiers who do 30 hours all summer long, and then, for 3 months they're doing like 10 to 15 hours. My training is pretty high volume all the time, um, until race
Killian
week, frankly.
Jornet, did you see what Killian Jornet just came out with?
I did. I haven't gotten to digest all of that, but I did kind of glance over it, and kind of a little bit. Yeah. I mean, I will say his training actually, I think, is a bit more periodized than it used to be, but he was pretty infamous for a long time of like, he would show up to World Cups in Skimo with 20 hours already in his legs by Friday and still win. Like, I think as he's gotten older and everyone else has gotten faster as well, he's had to be a little smarter, which is cool to see him sort of adapt to that. But no, I mean, not to the level of Killian. Yeah, I mean, so I will say, yeah, I mean, I do, again, like I basically average about 1,000 hours a year annually. And when you break that out into, race weeks, and if you're racing like 10 weekends in the winter or something, um, and you're trying to sort of taper and be fast for those, like you've really got to keep the volume pretty high almost all the rest of the time. And then if you factor in, you know, a 2 week off season and maybe a couple weeks of sickness over the years somewhere, and I've got 3 toddlers, so that's always fun. And so, yeah, like just to stay on top of and I do think I respond really well to volume. Um, and to stay on top of that, I consistently shoot for pretty big weeks. That said, it's certainly not all the same. I mean, I do tend to work on some level of a 3-to-1 schedule most of the time, and so that could be 3 weeks on, 1 week recovery. A lot of times I break it down into smaller chunks. Like I like these. Sometimes I'll take like a 3 week chunk and break that down into a 3-to-1, and just because I feel like, especially as winter approaches, I can just do like higher quality. And I also get like a full week of recovery. Just drives me nuts. Like I'd always feel like crap, frankly, if I take a full week like just chilling out. And so, um, I do train pretty high volumes. I like, certainly on my build weeks, I like them to be like 25 hours. I rarely ever go over 30 hours, to be honest, but I do a lot of 25 hours. Um, but then by the same token, anything under 20, and I kind of feel like I'm shortchanging myself unless I have a race, the next
Yeah.
week or something, which is
You,
bad. I
you,
mean, I think, maybe I'll blame you a little bit. Like TrainingPeaks makes it too easy to track my metrics, and I I think I'm getting better at not being as obsessed with like chasing the numbers, but at the same time, um, I've noticed, sort of actually, I guess like that year of the pandemic, or kind of the year leading up to the pandemic, I should say, starting kind of 6 months before. That was like the first year I really broke that like 1,000 hours a year mark, and I know that's sort of just that's not a true. It's not really it, it's not real in the sense that you don't need to hit that, but it is real in the sense that if you look across, and my coach Adam, he's we're always sending each other like studies back and forth,
right.
and when
It
you
was
look
Adam.
across,
Your coach is Adam St. Pierre. Is that right?
yeah, Adam St. Pierre. But when you're looking at like the broader spectrum of endurance sports, and in particular like cycling, rowing, cross country skiing, these sports that don't have the impact and sort of trauma of running, and you take that out, like that 1,000 hours is sort of like the barrier to entry to the elite level, to medals at like world champs, Olympics, whatever it is. And I will say, the more I've focused on just increasing that annual volume, um, the more it's worked. I mean, I've only gotten faster, and I'm 35, and I should be, getting slower. And yet I didn't, I couldn't break 40 minutes in Ajax until I broke that mark. And um, I couldn't break 6:15 at Leadville until I had a couple years of that volume underneath my belt. And I do
Right.
think there's something to it where, even if the races are on the shorter side, especially in Skimo, um, and yeah, you want to be really fresh and sharp for those events for sure. And I'll do pretty heavy tapers into those, to be sure. But I do think having that big volume has really helped from a consistency point of view. You can come back from a little illness or injury, or what have you, and just bounce back quicker. And even if you're at 95% that day, you can still win a race, hopefully, or do well, just because you have such depth there. And I don't know the physiology behind it all, admittedly, but I think, at least in my head, I attribute some of that to like living at pretty high altitude. Like 8,000 feet. Yeah, I feel, at least for me personally, I can only do so much truly high intensity in a week, um, and recover from it. Um, at this altitude, whereas I can do a ton of volume and still recover from it. And so for me, that's just the formula that seems to work the best. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me again of what Killian just posted about his training. He did like, I don't know, 3 speed workouts and maybe 8 threshold workouts, and he goes and sets the record at UTMB, Hard Rock. He's an alien, but
Yeah,
there's something fundamental there as well.
well, I mean, I can't speak to that. I mean, Killian is the GOAT, and he's someone I've looked up to for a decade now, and I think everyone across almost all of sport just um, realizes he's on something of a different level than the rest of us. I will say, like, don't take it the wrong way. Like, I do a lot of structured training. I mean, basically, almost all year I'm doing 2 intensity sessions a week. It's very rare that I'll do like a high volume week without any intensity in it. I've
And when
tried
you
to get
say
a little
2 a
more
week, is that
flexible.
threshold workouts?
Yeah, I mean, Adam and I definitely played around with it a bit, and certainly, kind of like I touched on in the fall, leading into the Skimo season, we'll get a little fancier, as I say. And we've done some stuff with like kind of block periodization and sort of these just ultra intense blocks, which are miserable, but seem to work if I don't get sick. But no, I mean, for the spring and summer and sort of the general kind of prep weeks, I just tend to follow sort of like a Wednesday, Saturday, or a Tuesday, Friday, whatever it is. Just and I've mixed it up. Like sometimes we'll focus, yeah, on just threshold for this 3 week session, or just VO2. But I still for Leadville, for example, I just kept it really simple, and I was doing midweek threshold workouts and weekend sweet spot workouts, and just increasing the volume of time at intensity sort of week over week until I was up to basically like 2.5 hours of sweet spot in a 6 hour ride. And when I knew I could do that, I was like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good for Leadville. And it worked, because again, Leadville is a bit different. I mean, Leadville really doesn't require, it requires a big motor and smart pacing, or as smart as you can be to make those front groups, which is not always that smart. Um, but and really good, sort of like hydration and nutrition. It doesn't require the same punch that like an XCO mountain bike race would, or the same level of like threshold that a Skimo race would, which is just maintaining 99% of your threshold for an hour and a half. I mean, Skimo is different. Skimo is honestly, I've never been in as much pain in my life as a Skimo World Cup. And so to me, almost any other sporting event, and they're all as hard. Like, that's sort of, people ask you what's harder, and whatever you just finished is hardest, is sort of what I say, right? Because
Yeah,
if you really are a racer and you give it your all, and you cross that finish line and you can't stand up half the time. I mean, but I will say that there is something about that individual effort, especially in Europe against Euros at that lower elevation. Um, there is literally no rest. I mean, like even in the XCO, where you're punching well above threshold on the climbs, like you're recovering for a few seconds at a time on descents. But in Skimo World Cups, on technical descents, like all of my max heart rates in Skimos have been in World Cup descents, not on climbs,
wow,
where like
yeah, surprising.
it's just so full on, and it just goes from like your lungs are screaming on the way up, but then on the way down, like the acid in your legs is just,
Right.
you can't even see straight. And it's totally different racing in the US, where there's a lot of groomers connecting different sections of descents and whatnot, and so it becomes a bit more like a mountain bike race in that regard. But yeah, it's all relative, and so I just sort of switch up like my focus, and I definitely am a little old school in that. Like in the summer, I basically focus on sweet spot and threshold work more, and then in the fall, leading into the winter, I focus a bit more on threshold and VO2. And yeah, It's kind of old school, but it works pretty well for me. I do switch it up occasionally with, like I said, sort of block periodization, but that's not always the most sustainable for me, where I'll get really fast, but then, yeah, like I'll just blow up or get sick or overdo it. And so it sort of depends. If I do have a big race like a world championships, then it's a whole different discussion for the month before that. But for general sort of 10 month out of the year fitness, it's pretty meat and potatoes.
And you mentioned strength work, right? You plug in some strength work, and what time of the year do you add that in, or is it year
I
round?
do a bit of strength almost all year round, although I tend not to do much on race weeks. I do tend to, and again, I don't, it's sort of relative, right? Like I think compared to a lot of athletes, I do very little strength work, but compared to endurance athletes, especially cyclists, a lot of whom do zero, I do a ton of strength work, right? But a lot of that goes back to sort of learning how to ride as much as possible and run as little as possible in the summer, and yet be able to handle that transition to skiing in the fall. Which, if you truly just ride a bike all summer and then try to jump into Skimo specific training in the fall, you will be absolutely crushed, and your training will suffer as a result. You just won't be able to do the volume, the vert, or the intensity, because your legs will just they won't be adapted to that eccentric loading from the descents whatsoever, and you're just gonna be walking around like a you know octogenarian for
So that's
two
what I have to
months.
look forward to right now because
um,
I haven't done barely any strength and zero running.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I've figured out pretty well the last few years kind of how little I can get away with. And so I do still run like every week during the summer usually, but it's pretty short, like just a couple like half-hour sessions, especially this summer when I was leading into Leadville. Um, and then it doesn't take a lot of strength if you're doing the right strength work to kind of keep some of that adaptation in your legs, so that when you do need to jump back into more like hiking and running, and roller skiing and that sort of stuff, you're kind of in a better. I mean, it's still going to be a rough adaptation for maybe a week or two, but it doesn't. Instead of a week or two, or sorry, it's a week or two instead of a month or two, where it used to be that much. Um,
Yeah.
and that's not really very helpful. Where like you kind of then only get to the point where it's November and you finally feel like your legs are able to run down, like 2,000 meters of mountains, and that doesn't work so well if you're trying to get fast. Yeah, so I've been a fan of that. I mean, not a fan. I mean, honestly, I don't like strength work very much. But again, kind of going back to that back injury I had, in 2011, I've always had to do quite a fair bit of core work, to kind of keep that stable, and stay on top of that. And so adding in, a bit more leg strength was sort of just a pretty natural progression from that. And yeah, like I said, I do tend to not do it on race week. Um, that might just be in my head, but when I do tend to taper. I train a lot, but then I also taper quite hard for the week of the race, and maybe that's because I'm a little overtrained a lot of the time, and I just feel like I really need to catch up on some of the rest quickly. But along with that is sort of like, yeah, giving the muscles some time to relax and recover. I don't know. I see guys like Nino posting stuff about him doing like just these massive like squat workouts and stuff like the week of a World Cup. I'm just like, whoa. But it's almost like a different sport when you talk about guys who are punching like 500 watts for 2 minutes, you know, for for an hour and a half. That's very different than just grinding it out at Leadville,
Yeah.
at 10,000 feet.
What's like a couple key exercises in your strength routine?
um, I mean, for core stuff, I just kind of live and die by planks and all the plank variations. And planks are kind of fun because there are a million ways to do them, to make them harder, easier, um, and work on other sort of uh, muscle groups and sort of coordination and balance stuff along with that. So lots of plank variations in there. And then on the leg side of things, I definitely focus on single leg stuff. I do almost no double leg strength exercises, honestly, because again, I don't like doing strength work, and so I do try to keep it as specific and focused as possible, so I can get the sort of best bang for buck and then get back outside to do something more fun. And so I do a lot of like sort of single leg squats and single leg box jumps and like eccentric loading stuff. So kind of like versions of jumping lunges with and without weight and from different sort of positions to kind of load that landing phase, which is the one that kills you, as you know, when you start running downhill or something, let alone skiing downhill with your.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I've got a few, um, and they don't have to be long. I mean, I probably spend between an hour to 2 hours in the gym a week out of, and if your training is 20 to 30 hours a week, it sort of never adds up to, I mean, maybe 5% of my training time total. Um, but a little goes a long way. And
Yeah.
then I could spend a lot more time outside having fun.
Well, now you
Yeah,
have a family, you have your day job, strafe clothing, and you said you had some kids. Do you do double days? How do you work all these hours into the work
I do.
schedule,
It's a
family schedule?
it's a busy one for sure sometimes, and I think certain times of the year I handle it better than others. um, but I mean, I have a very patient and loving wife for one, who is great at giving me the flexibility to kind of bank the hours I need. Um, but yeah, I've got three kids, 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and but they're great. Honestly, like more than anything, I think you hear a lot from a lot of other parents is that it just focuses them a bit more. And I mean, I never got really, really fast, in my opinion, until I had kids. And a part of that was a few different things. I mean, one, again, I started in endurance sports quite late. So I just didn't even have the knowledge, let alone fitness foundation to train at the level I needed to. And so sort of it all built up to that first year that I had Will, who's now 5, was sort of the first year that I was super focused in training at like what I would call like a pro level, for a variety of reasons. But then when you do have kids, yeah, you don't have the same amount of time to waste, especially if you've got a second job, at Strafe. And so I just don't waste a lot of time. Like I don't, and I could, for better or worse, right? Like I probably train alone 99% of the time. And that's not always great, especially in the winter when you're talking about, sort of backcountry conditions and whatnot. And it can be a little boring sometimes too when you're alone all the time. But just with kids and stuff, you have to be a little flexible, and you don't have the same luxury of just sort of meeting up with friends whenever it fits into their schedule or whatnot. And so you just have to find that window and make it happen and not procrastinate too much when it comes time to get the work done. And I think it also helps a lot. I mean, like with like sleep hygiene and just general sort of like life routines. I mean, obviously having kids instills that pretty quickly, and I think that goes a long way too to just forming habits to get up every day and you know start doing the work. Like, and that work could be strafe, it could be kids, or it could be training, right? And but either way, you got to be like uh, sort of on it from when you wake up and or when the kid wakes you up and you get them off to school or whatever, and then it's like go time. So no, it's good. It's honestly like I said, I think I actually, aside from bringing home the random, pre-K illness every other week, it seems like, and dealing with that, I would say that overall having kids has actually made me a better athlete for sure. And I also think it kind of reframes the picture a bit too. I mean, when you're suffering out there and you think you're suffering, but then it gives you a bit more other than just yourself to think about. Like if you're going to go out and train for 5 hours a day, you want to make it count and you want to get the most out of it because it's time that you're giving up, uh, that you could be spending with your wife, with your kids, or at work, and you really want to feel like you're sacrificing for something worthwhile. And I think that's gone a long way too to just making sure that I do, I don't just go out for a 5 hour ride and soft pedal just to see the hours tick by. Like I'm not out there just to like tick a box. I'm out there to like get the best out of myself and improve. And the only way to do that is to be accountable to yourself. And if you're faking it to yourself, like what's going to happen when you line up against, yeah, like at Leadville, like I don't know, 30 pros, like it's not gonna go so well. So I think having kids has definitely helped. Yeah, just sort of make it all. Um, there's just a bit more on the line, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So, what is the future of ski mountaineering racing in the United States? We know it's much bigger in Europe. They have thousands of people on the start line in some of these races. PDG, Piera, Menta. What could you hope for in your lifetime with Skimo in the United States?
if you'd asked me that question 6 months ago, I would have been a bit more optimistic. Right now, um, I'm a little jaded by the recent Olympic decision to remove the individual event from the 2026 docket in favor of just keeping the sprint, and that, in my opinion, is going to really hurt the growth of Skimo in this country. Unfortunately, I think we were right on the precipice of, like you said. I mean, you race even more than I do in the States. Seems like you go to every cosmic race around, and it's awesome. I mean, the participation numbers have been going up and up every year, and I think they still will at a recreational level. But um, there are a few good junior development programs in the pipeline, especially the one out in Utah, and Joe's and Breck as well. But I think those. I don't know a lot of athletes who are viewing this most recent decision to remove individual event from the Olympics in a positive light. I don't know anyone, frankly, in the sport of skimo who got into it to be a sprint racer. Skimo is, by definition, an extremely aerobic event, and almost everyone who comes to it comes from a cycling or a trail running or a backcountry skiing or cross country skiing background. And to make it an Olympic sport, but your event is 3 to 3.5 minutes long, it really has very little to do with the actual sport of skimo,
Yeah, the
and
spectacle.
I it's a spectacle, exactly. I mean, I compare it to, it's exactly like the cross country eliminator race in mountain biking. They had it, they tried a few years back or a decade now, and it was a total joke. I mean, it was easy to put on. They could do it in city centers. It was popular to watch and drink beers at, but as an actual form of mountain biking, it had absolutely nothing to do with the sport. And the athletes hated it so much, and the organizing bodies, the individual athletic associations of the countries, all, it was very much viewed as a second tier light, and they promptly got rid of it. And that's exactly what sprint is to skimo, to me and to many other athletes. It's great that it's in the Olympics, maybe, but I think most people I've talked to agree that it would have been far better off to just cut all of skimo from the Olympics and wait a full additional cycle than to kind of introduce our sport on the world stage with this event in particular. Um, and I just don't see a lot of youth in particular, young, fast kids who could be going towards cycling. I don't see them putting their energies towards developing as skimo athletes if that's the only event they have to look forward to from a career development and longevity point of view. Um, and Yeah, again, so I think skimo, sadly, I think we're going to be in a state of sort of just status quo for at least 4 years, or until they announce, and hopefully in 2030 they announce that the individual race gets put back into the Olympics, and I think that will restart the discussion of developing pipelines to get fast kids into the sport the way they do in Europe towards those individual events. But I think until that sport is in the Olympics, you're only going to have so much youth development because there's no money in this sport. It's not like, I mean, there's not a lot of money in mountain biking, but there's much less money in skimo. And
Right, right.
so there is no career path other than, I mean, racing World Cups is it's the actual racing is just as competitive as an Olympic event, to be sure. But because we don't have a well-funded national body, there's no career opportunity to, I can't be a I can't race for the US Skimo team as my only source of income the way you can if you're in France, Italy,
Yeah,
Germany, Switzerland, Austria, what have you. And so until and the US federations, they're not going to get that funding until that individual event is in the Olympics. So it's sort of a chicken and the egg type of thing. So I don't know. I think it's still great that on the grassroots level, like these races are popular. You've seen it. I mean, they're as popular as ever, right? Especially almost since the pandemic, they've just exploded. And now it is super cool to show up and race with 100 to 200 people at these individual events, or something like Power Four or Grand Traverse, or many times that for the team events. And that's great. But I think at the tip of the spear, you're not going to see. Um, I don't know. I worry that you're not going to see like the development of elite athletes the way that we would have if they had kept that in the Olympic program. Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the only thing that keeps me really excited is the growth of the actual entrant numbers, at these races. I mean,
it's huge.
we've had Wednesday night races, up at a local area, Eldora, and we get over 100 people, on Wednesday night, racing at night. I think more resorts are allowing uphill skinning in resort, so that brings more organic growth. So hopefully we can kind of continue that trend, and hopefully one day we get cross country individual, in the Olympics, and to help with the pointy end, and the athlete
As
development.
yeah, absolutely. And as a sport, as a participation sport, it's grown exponentially, and I see that continuing to occur. I mean, in Aspen, I think we probably have more people going uphill across the four resorts than
Yeah,
um, any other resort in the country, frankly. And it's just every year it's more and more. And I mean, they have like tickers to count these things. It can be hundreds per day sometimes,
that's great.
which is super cool. And you see that in the sales of hard goods, like the Skimo and the lightweight skis, bindings, boots, and even in strafe with like our recon line, kind of our lightweight gear, to go along with that. Like people are just craving it, and that's awesome. But I think so. I think at like the recreationally fast level, like you're going to see more events and really good participation numbers. But it's like the actual racer development part that I think we are still not nearly as far ahead as we should be. I mean, I started my first year on the U.S. team was 2013 World Championships,
Yeah,
and we still don't have a I mean, we definitely have a more organized system now than we do. We have monthly Zoom calls and stuff, and Strava training groups and all that, but it's still a pretty lax affair compared to any other sort of professional or elite level endurance sport. And when you look at sort of the resources that the Italians have, I mean, that they're taking these kids from the age of 10 and putting them into these development programs and pipelines, and you can't make up for that. Like you
yeah,
just can't. You can't. I don't think you can't really take a B team cross country. Like I mean, really fit kids from other endurance sports who just didn't make the Olympic cut in that sport. I think Skimo is too specific now at that high level to be able to take those kids at that older age and sort of remold them. I think you can to some degree, but when you actually look at like the top guys in Europe, like they've been doing this as their sole focus for decades, and it shows. And I that is my concern from from the competitive point of view at least.
well, awesome. Hey, congrats on such a great season. You got I don't know, first race is probably November coming up on the snow. So I'll see you out there, and can't wait to get to threshold red line, headed uphill at 10,000 feet somewhere.
Oh
I'm
man,
looking
I know
forward
it's
to it.
a whole different kind of suffering, but it'll be fun. And yeah, I haven't seen the U.S. calendar yet, but I'm sure I'll see you at quite a few races here before heading
Absolutely.
over to Europe. And thanks again for having me on the show.
It was great getting insights into managing different sports and killing it in both. So thank you so much, John. It was a big pleasure.
All right, thanks, Dirk.